Thank you, Mr. Professor. Right now we have come to the end of our first part of our conference. And right now ahead of us we have a first discussion panel which will cover the social issues. May I ask Mr. Sebastian Rejak, Mr. Jarosław Nowak, and Ms. Joanna Dyduch to join me on the stage because I will be the moderator of our panel. And the panel will start in a few moments. We'll just connect everything. So give us 2 minutes.
Is it working? Perfect. Okay, so basically we've just switched places and we're ready to launch our first panel at our conference, which is the social panel. If gentlemen, can we first of all, Ms. Joanna, can you hear us?
Hello.
Okay, so
good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So let me first introduce our guests. Ms. Joanna Dyduch, professor at the Jagiellonian University at the Faculty of International and Political Studies and the member of the board of the Association of Israel Studies. Her research interests lie in the area of Israeli and European studies. She's the author of many publications on foreign policy and international relations on both theoretical and practical sides. Hello, good afternoon. Mr. Sebastian Rejak, the acting director of the American Jewish community in Central Europe. He also performed diplomatic functions in the field of Polish-American relations, relations with the Jewish Diaspora, Polish interministerial cooperation also in NATO. Hello, it's great that you're with us. And Mr. Jarosław Nowak, Plenipotentiary of the Minister of Foreign Affairs for contacts with Jewish Diaspora. He's also a social activist and an entrepreneur. Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great that you're with us today here at this beautiful hall at the Warsaw Stock Exchange. If it is not a problem for you, I will leave last 5 minutes of our panel to be covered for questions from the audience, if there were any. As the purpose of our conference is basically discussing the recent diplomatic, economic and business cooperation issues between Poland, Germany and Israel. Of course, later panels will cover topics of business and innovation more deeply, but right now we are in the social panel. So basically we will cover the topics of Polish-Israeli international relations. We will cover the matter of general cooperation of the European Union and the State of Israel, and also the role of international organizations in the whole process, which is also a fundamental factor. To begin with, we can say that Polish-Israeli international relations have been renewed quite parallel with the foundation of the Third Polish Republic in 1919. And since that time, we have observed these bilateral relations developing, but also in recent years, we have seen some disturbances. So maybe I will start with a question to Mr. Rejak. In an interview for MSZ Foundation more than a year ago, you said that we can look for some optimistic signs for future relations between Poland and Israel. Since that time, we have seen a few major changes. There is a new government in the State of Israel. So how would you describe the relations between Poland and Israel right now in this moment?
Yeah, you just asked the most difficult question and also proven me wrong. You've proven me wrong in what I said last year or 2 years ago. But I think we're doomed to some sort of optimism, at least a minimum of optimism. If that was not the case, then we wouldn't be here. That's one thing. But more to the point, is there any room for optimism in the current Polish bilateral Polish-Israeli relations? I will not give you a straightforward answer. Rather, I would say that from let's say the insider's perspective, there is an urgent need for some kind of enhanced communication. There is no relationship, and specifically no good relationship, without effective and successful communication. So communication channels, and I think my friend Jarosław Nowak will be able to tell us more about communication, but for me that's a fundamental thing, and we have not seen good communication between Polish and Israeli governments work for a couple of months now. So when we talk about communication today, I am not very optimistic, because this is something that's actually not happening. But again, I wouldn't be myself, and I wouldn't be performing the role that I do if I couldn't say I still hold some optimism for the future, and the future may be next week or next year. That remains to be seen. Apart from the two governments that have put themselves in this difficult situation, there are also non-state actors, in particular non-governmental organizations. And one such organization is the one that I'm a member of, the American Jewish Committee. We have always been a close partner of Poland and for Poland, and I guess I don't have to say that AJC, one of our pillars is to work for Israel's right place in the international arena. So we are, I think, quite well positioned to play the role of facilitator when it comes to Polish-Israeli relations. We have achieved a tiny little bit over the last couple of months, to which achievements I think Yara can also testify in a few seconds. So
I can.
My optimism is limited, but we have no other choice, and there's no other mechanism, there's no other tool than to be optimistic, provided that optimism is not just words, but that we are making tiny little steps.
Okay, so we'll come back basically to the some features that led to our current situation. But as you also mentioned, the communication, basically I had prepared another question, so I will ask it right now, Mr. Nowak. How would you describe the relations from the perspective of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in the side of communication, what actions are currently undertaken by both sides in order to deal with our relations?
First of all, I would say that despite the developments in last months, I do believe that the relations are very good. Surprisingly, maybe this statement has solid ground. First of all, in spite of the pandemic, coronavirus pandemic, we have excellent cooperation, business cooperation between these two countries. Secondly, there is a number of undisturbed relations that consider military cooperation, intelligence, and other fields of scientific cooperation. And I think that we shouldn't forget about it. I mean, this was not an easy task to achieve over the last 30 years. I truly believe that some people, including myself, were describing the situation as the worst state of the relations since the re-establishment of diplomatic contacts. I don't think it's really true. I mean, on the level of the governmental exchange of opinions or accusations, in spite of it, the cooperation is going very well. There is a great concern among these communities that I mentioned if it will continue to do well in the future, but I do think this is a great achievement that we didn't have 20 years ago. As far as the governmental relations and communications, it's on its lowest point since 1990. We do not have ambassadors. Limits the opportunities to explain to each other the positions. But not only that, I mean, unfortunately, for both countries, the embassies, both in Tel Aviv and in Warsaw, are empty. We do not have high-level representatives. The Israeli embassy is very weak right now, and the same I can say about Polish embassy. There's a very limited number of people working there. There is great expectation. There was a great expectation of changing the shift in the ambassadorship in both countries, and it didn't happen. I truly believe also that the reason for the state of relation is that, unlike many people say that we have a common past, we do have common past, but we don't necessarily know the truth about it. I mean, it's a great problem for the relations that Israelis and basically Jewish diaspora knows very little about atrocities committed by Soviets and Germans against Poles. There is this feeling that Holocaust was only tragic to Jews, but the reality is very different, I think. I mean, I have great experience in guiding groups of both activists from different Jewish organizations, but also just regular folks. And if we go, for example, in Warsaw to the Warsaw Uprising Museum, there is a great problem to understand that there were two uprisings in Warsaw. So this is, I would say, underachievement of Polish governments for the last 30 years. We should do more about it.
Okay, thank you. So also you divided these relations on two grounds, the economical one and also the political one. So we'll come back to some, as I said, some features of our relations later. I would have a question to Ms. Dyduch. First of all, would you add anything to the matter of bilateral relations according to what the gentleman said recently? And also, is there then anything what you think could be done to improve the Polish-Israeli relations in the future from this place?
Sorry, you can hear me well. I must admit that I have some problems with the connection. I don't know if it's on my side, but I'm not sure entirely if I understood everything that has been said. But anyway, I did my best, and actually referring to what already has been said, I would say first, referring to what Mr. Sebastian Rejak said, I believe that the most important is, of course, the representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Nowak, that actually we lost with Israel, at least at this diplomatic level, the, let's say, common language. At the moment, I have an impression that there is no communication. And I have an impression that we also forgot language which we actually learned over these 30 years, how to discuss some problematic issues, how to discuss and speak about shared history, which is sometimes causing some let's say tensions. At the moment, I wouldn't agree completely with, unfortunately, and I'm now speaking as chair of the European Association of Israel Studies, based at the Jagiellonian University, which has been moved from London, from SOAS to Poland. It has been seen as a sign of, excellent relations with Israel and with Israeli academia and with Israel studies course in Europe. Past months also for us are quite difficult because it's, I must say, I'm sometimes myself surprised, being in the topic for at least almost a decade. I'm surprised to be in a position of explaining why European Association of Israel Studies is actually based in Poland. It is based in Poland because the Israel Studies has been developing in Poland quite successfely. But at the moment, this problematic, let's say, atmosphere and tensions entered my, let's say, academic life. I have to explain, and this we didn't have this kind of challenges, but I would say these tensions has also entered our private lives. Just to give you an example, I have friends from Israel at home during holidays, and these talks, like these are my close friends. We know each other since years, but these talks over the political crisis also enter our private space. So I would say the relations with Israel at the moment are not very good. I wouldn't even say they are good. They are in crisis, and we have to find a way how to overcome it. Of course, I completely agree with Mr. Sebastian that there is a great importance of non-state actors, but non-state actors will never replace or cannot compete with diplomacy. So, to my mind, we need to come back to the, let's say, old school diplomatic measurements and instruments. And I don't want to say to rebuild the relations with Israel and with other partners, Polish partners, but try to, yes, to somehow to put them back on the track. That's my recommendation. Let's come back to how it was in the past. At the moment, I believe something has happened, and the fact that in some crucial diplomacies, in crucial embassies, as for instance in Czech Republic, as in Israel, we do not have an ambassador. It's a problem.
Yes, and I think basically looking for a way to come back to the old relations is something that both sides basically somehow want to achieve at the end. But before we go further, I will have one question that I think I have to ask, because we have said about some tensions, about some maybe disturbed relations. But the recent ignition of this thing started with a Code of Administrative Procedure novelization, so Polish KPA. And I would like to ask Mr. Rejak, what do you think is the impact of this novelization, and could be considered also anti-Semitic? And as we also know, there are many other stakeholders in all of this that are also affected by the novelization.
Yeah, this is an obvious question. Is the law anti-Semitic, or was it motivated by anti-Semitic goals? The short answer is no, and I think anybody with a basic knowledge of the problem of property restitution and some really basic knowledge of Poland's history would say that there's no anti-Semitism in the law. But I agree with what Professor Nowak-Far has said, that it is, and he said, our duty to try to explain what the law is about. Of course, there are different roles, and the role of the foreign ministry is different than the role of my organization. But even speaking from within the AJC community, we did have a role in the past, in the past several months, and still consider ourselves an intermediary. I myself was trying to play the role of go-between the Jewish community and, to an extent, Israeli society on one hand and Polish society on the other hand. One channel of communication is the media. So we have been active in the media, trying to briefly explain, well, you cannot expect regular media to go really deeply into the problem, but at least to some degree, to offer people some handful of facts. So the long answer to your question is, I and most of the people who I work with do not see the law as anti-Semitic, but at the same time, I can understand, in a way, those who claim, no, it is anti-Semitic. Why do I understand their reasoning, even though I disagree? I understand them because they see it as just yet another event or yet another step on the way that they see as opposing what we used to think of as established history. And that process in which the amendment of the Administrative Procedure Code is just one point in that whole process. That process started several years ago, but definitely 2018 was a big surprise to a lot of people with the law on IPN that was considered an attempt to rewrite history. Then 2019, you had another tension between Polish and Israeli governments that was about anti-Semitism being allegedly imbibed by Poles with their mother's milk, a clash between foreign ministries, and instead of having both parties work to go back to pre-2018, what we saw a few months ago is what we saw. But again, I would say there's no anti-Semitism in the law. The reason why some people claim the law, the amendment, is anti-Semitic is because it has addressed a complicated question that the far right in Poland has used tremendously over the last couple of years with the famous Stop 447, which is, of course, the US law addressing the question of property restitution, by the way, not only in Poland, in the whole world, let's say. So that, when you look from a different perspective, the amendment of the law may look as if it was an element in a wider picture that looks anti-Semitic.
Okay, thank you. Of course, if any of the panelists would like to add anything, maybe Mr. Nowak, from your perspective.
Well, I do agree that the main problem that we are facing as a country, I think government we didn't put enough effort to explain what government is doing. It's quite obvious for me. And on the other hand, it's very, as far as the amendments to civil procedure law, I think it should be more discussed. I mean, the intention was good, but it wasn't made clear to partners abroad what the intention is.
So again, the matter of communication would be also mentioned at the beginning. Okay, so moving on, we have talked about some Polish-Israeli relations, but we also know that Israel is a close cooperating partner of the European Union. Israel is a part of European Neighborhood Policy, also receives funds from the European Neighborhood Instrument. We have another cooperation examples between Israel and European Union, like Erasmus exchange, so students from Poland and Israel can exchange universities between universities quite easily within their studies. So I have one question to Ms. Dyduch. What would you say about the European Union-Israeli relations right now, and how would you name the main factors there or any recent issues?
Thank you very much for this very good question. So when speaking about European or EU relations with Israel, one needs to remember that there are, let's say, two main, dimensions. One is always efficient and effective, and this is economic cooperation in the field of scientific exchange, including Israel's participation in so-called framework programs in the past known as the Horizon. By the way, Israel is at the moment negotiating full participation and full membership in upcoming Horizon, and it seems it's going to be successful as in the past. And on the other hand, we need to remember that long-lasting, well-established, and framed by broad consensus among the member states, priority of the European Union in its neighborhood policy is active European involvement in Middle Eastern peace process. The European Union has, as I said, well-established and precisely defined position on the Middle Eastern peace process, being more precise on Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So, of course, the key issue here, or the key point, is a two-state solution. And under the long premiership, or during the long premiership of Benjamin Netanyahu, one could say that, or it has been said by observers, politicians, by European politicians, by scholars, that relations between Israeli officials, governmental officials, and EU were very problematic because of Netanyahu's policy towards Palestinians. So when the transition of power happened early this year, there were new signs of kind of a rapprochement between Israel and the European Union, between Israel and Europe. Just to mention a visit of Foreign Affairs Minister Rabbi to Brussels, or a visit of Prime Minister Bennett, or meeting with German Chancellor Merkel. But I would say let's see, because those who are interested in Israeli politics know that the Prime Minister Bennett is rather a hawkish politician. He is not really willing, or in the past was not really open for compromises, far-reaching compromises with Palestinians. Though I must say that some weeks ago I went to Brussels speaking with some Euro bureaucrats, politicians, members of the European Parliament. So on the European side in Brussels, there is a lot of hope that this new rapprochement between Israel and the European Union will happen, and they even recall stories or history of other right-wing politicians who made some tremendous step towards the peace and like a new regionalism in the Middle East, for instance, Begin, or even Menahem, of course, or even Ariel Sharon, who withdrew or who ended the Israeli occupation of Gaza Strip. So let's see. I would say that we may observe in the coming months or coming weeks and coming months some new developments, and some would say that probably Israel will come back to to the old routine of enlarging its or improving its position in the West Bank, and but there are also voices and opinions that under Bennett and Lapid, Israel may come back to negotiation table and make a really concession on regarding the relations with Palestinians. So let's see. I don't know if you asked something about, because I still have these problems with hearing, but if you have asked something about the Poland and EU policy towards Israel. If not, then I just leave it without comment.
Yeah, we could have more time to dive into it, but unfortunately we are quite on schedule. But there's one issue. I think we can stay within this area of relations between Israel and also still European Union, but also Poland, because it was also mentioned the role of international organizations. So I would like to come back to this. And Mr. Rejak, what would you say is the role of international organizations in building country-to-country ties? And are Israel and European Union, and also Israel and Poland a good example?
We are coming back to the EU again. It's still an international organization, a very special one. And the other one that I want to talk about will be, of course, the United Nations. Dr. Dyduch has mentioned the fact that there is a lively debate within the EU as to how to shape its relations with Israel. There is still a relatively new government in place. There are a few member states within the EU that are pushing quite strongly for the EU to modify or soften its relationship with Israel. It's Hungary and the Czech Republic, first and foremost, and they are specifically saying out loud that the EU should convene the association council with Israel. That has not taken place since 2013, if I remember correctly. So this is one thing. Very recently, we saw a joint statement signed by spokespersons of several EU member countries, notably Germany, France, Ireland, the Netherlands, and Poland among them. I think that there was like 10 or maybe 10 plus countries. Poland was the only Central European member of the EU to have signed onto that statement, and the statement was basically critical of Israel's decision to approve of the construction of 300 new housing units in the so-called disputed territories. To my if I remember correctly, this was the first time that Poland joined a number of EU members who spoke critically of Israel, not on behalf of the EU, but on behalf of that particular group of countries. It's something we probably have never seen. This is what limits my optimism, going back to your first question. I still see room for improvement and the urgent need for improvement, but what we are witnessing on a daily basis is it's not leading us there. We can further develop that topic in a few minutes. Now the UN. Also, a recent development, just over a month ago, we saw a very positive step, a decision by Poland, namely to boycott the so-called Durban 20 Plus conference, which of course was going to be anti-Semitic because it was meant to celebrate the original 2001 conference that was all out anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist in words, anti-Semitic in fact. Poland was among the last countries to announce its decision, but finally the decision was not to participate in that conference, which was appreciated by the Israeli government. The Israeli government thanked all those countries who chose to skip the conference. So this is something that gives us hope and also demonstrates the positive feelings that they are. And also shows that there are some fundamental values that countries, partners want to support regardless of the current situation between the current state of relations between them. For Poland, I guess, it was, that's my understanding, it was of the utmost importance to demonstrate its opposition to agreeing to holding an anti-Semitic conference on the international arena. Poland's demonstration was very strong. I guess we will continue to have signs building our hope and signs limiting that hope. It remains to be seen what happens on the international arena in the coming weeks, but I would love to hear from Jarosław Nowak how he sees Poland's position or possible position in the coming weeks and months within the EU.
Yeah, basically that was the question I intended to leave for the end, but as we have started talking about this, I think it would be a good time to ask Mr. Nowak about this issue.
First of all, I should remind you that since the end of communism, Poland was basically very critical about Israel, especially on the side of Arab states in every conflict, every possible way, actually. Since '89, Poland was unconditionally supporting Israel in all its endeavors on international arena. I think the recent developments, statement of Mr. Rabbi created an atmosphere that can be very harmful for the future. There was no single political party in Poland for the last 30 years that was questioning the support of Israel. Moreover, I would think that Poles as a society can really feel very well the position of Israel in its environment. We are also between countries that are very hostile or were very hostile toward Poland, and we can understand the situation that Israel is exposed to. However, this era of unconditional support for Israel has come to a probe, I would say, maybe not the end, because there is this feeling or discussions among many politicians in the current government that you cannot continue to be a strong ally of a country that one of the highest representatives talks about Poles as anti-Semites. And Obviously, this is a nonsense what Rabbi said, but it's a repeating of a statement of a long line of Israeli politicians, and it's not very well received by the society. In the democratic country, you cannot pursue a politic without the support of the voters.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, all that was said recently during the last 10 minutes leads us to another thing I would like to issue. I would like to say and ask also, especially to Ms. Dyduch, because of course we have observed that in recent years Poland, as well as other Central European states, are considered as Israel's ally in relations with European Union. And if you can summarize and what would you say is right now the role of Poland in EU-IS relationships, and has it also somehow changed in recent months, as there are also some unsolved issues on the Warsaw-Brussels line?
Is it a question to me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I would start like this, the main thing is that in the past month, Poland, the narrative, or the ruling class, or the politicians in Poland, about foreign policy and the European policy is making a kind of a distinction between Poland and the EU. So, while speaking about relations, when we speak about relations between, so we started to speak that Poland is a part of the EU and has something to say on international, all kinds of international affairs with our relations with the so-called third countries. But the dominant narrative is that Poland is a sovereign state which has its own foreign policy, and one element of this foreign policy is a European policy. In the past, Poland, I would say, and this is something that the European studies scholars would probably completely agree with me, in the past, the narrative was emphasizing the fact that Poland is a part of the European Union, and European Union foreign policy is a Poland policy, or we are a part of this bigger picture, and we of course want to contribute with our voices, also respecting the, let's say, the dynamic of the group. For example, we accept or we take for granted this consensus-oriented culture of policy making of the European Union. And this very much applies to relations between Poland and Israel, and Poland and Israel and Europe, or in this, let's say, triangle. So what I would say at the moment, European Union is an external partner as Israel is an external partner. This is how we can, how these, in an official narrative, these two actors are portrayed. So I would say that at the moment, I don't want to indicate the future, or I can assess the past and the present. But at the moment, Poland has no role in the European Union in regard to shaping the policy of the European Union towards Israel, because simply Poland, to a great extent, withdraw from this position of being active, let's say, an actor that actively defines European foreign policy. So for Poland has to some extent renationalized own foreign policy. This is something that we observed in relations with the United States, and this is something we observed in relations with other third countries. And today I've been traveling to Prague and I was listening to Polish Radio 24 and so many opinions that the Brussels is not going to dictate Poland anything or something, whatever. This language has also impact on Polish ability to upload own interest on the European level. That means that if we say that Brussels is not going to dictate us anything, we are minimalizing the own abilities to upload our own interest and to make our own interest to, let's say, name it a European or to make it a European. And this is, I would say, observed by Israel and some, I would say, careful but tentative conclusion. Israel knows and understands, this is what comes from my talks with Israelis in my scholarly interviews, that Israel knows that the position of Poland in today's European Union is, because of many reasons, its circumstances different than it was like 10 years ago. So this fact that Poland is a member of the European Union plays a smaller role in relation with Israel.
Okay, thank you. Yes, of course.
Yeah, I will refrain from commenting on Poland's position within the EU, but it's hard to disagree with what Dr. Dyduch has said about the wider context. I'd like to go back to what Dr. Dyduch said in her first intervention, and she stressed the importance of diplomacy, of diplomatic language, both on a bilateral level and multilateral level. This is something that we're lacking in Polish-Israeli bilateral relations, diplomatic language. Sometimes you can disagree. This is what Rabbi Schudrich said a few minutes ago, or half an hour ago. You can heavily disagree on issues that you should talk. For countries to talk over points of divergence, you have to employ diplomatic language. What we have seen on both sides, and I would say Minister Lapid's role was much more important in that. The use of undiplomatic language has led us to a place where we're in right now. So diplomatic language in trying to extinguish the fire is of the utmost importance. If you're not doing that, you're pouring fuel on the fire. And one more thing about the EU context. It's true that Poland's role within the EU is not the same as it was. Specifically, we're talking about relations with Israel. So Poland's relationship and Poland's position on Israel in Brussels is not the same. Poland has been replaced by Hungary and Lithuania. The Czechs have always been very pro-Israeli. Now Hungary is very active and successful. Lithuania the same. Let me just remind our audience that a few years ago, 4 to 5 years ago, the Lithuanian foreign minister, without consulting things even with Brussels, invited then Prime Minister Netanyahu to Brussels, which was quite a stunt. Nevertheless, what I want to say is that there are other Central European countries, politically, demographically less important than Poland at least might be, that have taken over the role of leaders in shaping relations with Israel.
Yeah, I think that's worth noting. And before we see if we have any questions from the audience, I would like to ask Mr. Nowak for a kind of summarizing what we have said and also to mention potential directions of our Polish and Israeli relations in the future, and should we be positive about this?
I wouldn't make any predictions, taking into consideration predictions that my colleague did a year or two ago. basically, making any predictions in foreign policy is really a very hard thing to do.
It's hard to learn from somebody else's mistake.
You know, you should remember that everything you say will be used in the next interview next year.
Okay, but what I think is on the level of foreign ministries of Poland and Israel, I don't see bright and easy future for these relations. We were asked by, it's not that we are not talking, we're talking, I'm constantly talking with people in Israel. I see that there is a great division between Mr. Lapid's and the foreign ministry. It's a specific way that the Israeli foreign ministry works. More different than it's very different from Polish foreign ministry. So there are people in the ministry there that not only use diplomatic language but also they express a great interest in normalizing the relations. The unknown actors are politicians of both sides, Israeli and in Poland, because there were some statements by Polish politicians that not contributed to easing the relations, but just pouring the fuel to a fire as well. But the biggest challenge will be normalizing the work of embassies, because I don't see that Israel is planning to do that. Israel is not really, I don't see in the foreseeable future any chance to have Israeli ambassador to Poland be nominated, and Ambassador Livna resigned from the function, and there is no candidate. Not only there is no candidate, but there is no roadmap to normalize the relations. So on the level of the foreign ministries, it's very hard to predict anything. We are, and I'm talking about my role in this conflict, we are very keen to normalize the relations, but the problem is that there is no will on the other side. And to give you an example of that, way before the administrative code amendments were made, I was informed by Israeli embassy that I will be not allowed to travel to Israel. So it's very difficult to have conversation if one side is limiting the access to meet people, not only between the government but also opposition and some people that were for past 30 years involved in shaping the relations.
Yeah, thank you very much. Right now, as we are about to end our debate, but before we do that, I will ask if we have any questions from the audience, because it's possible to ask. We have time for maybe one question. I don't see any. Oh, I see one. So, sir, Jews.
I think I allow more voice. Some people in my family don't like that at all. Henrik Jen from Germany is my name. My question would be, we see that something like the Erasmus exchange program was a good way over generations to implement like pro-European basic attitude among the students, and the question would be if you see any chances to implement something for like the Polish Israel or Polish German Israel relationships, maybe not just on the level of students, because probably more educated people are more open-minded often regarding this way too, but also for high school students or just normal exchange programs for youth people to normalize also in the new generations these positive exchange and positive pictures among each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
So I can tell you that from my experience, I mean, I've been doing the youth exchange programs over the last, I think, 25 years, with some successes. We had Israeli high school students coming to Poland, not only me, but the different organizations in Poland, different schools that were involved in this kind of action. So the idea was to bring Israeli high school students to Poland and to have them discovering the tragic past and the good past together with Polish high school students. Every time it was a case, it was very successful. It was not only successful on the educational level, but also on the level of developing friendships, you know, having people visiting each other after the program ended. I can only tell you from one program there are 3 marriages into national religious marriages. So it is very successful. It benefits both sides because Poles learn more about Holocaust and the way Israelis see it, and Israelis can see more about the tragic moments of Polish history as well. But the problem is that we are facing is that we cannot develop it on a larger scale. The main obstacle to this is that Israeli Ministry of Education and the authorities that are organizing these Holocaust trips to Poland, they are first of all scared about the security, which is, I don't think this is a real reason because there are no anti-Semitic violent incidents in Poland for 4 years. Secondly, they are not they don't feel comfortable with, you know, having a Polish counterpart because the aim of these trips is to prepare soldiers for the service. So it's basically the aim of these trips is to create feeling that they should be endangered in Poland, they should fear for their lives, and they should think about Poland as a very dangerous anti-Semitic place. I can only tell you that this is, I think, one of the reasons for problematic relations on the society's level. But I do hope that we will come to a point that we can do it together.
Thank you very much. And that will be it from our first social panel. Of course, if you have any further questions and if our panelists will stay with us for a late lunch, I think there will be an opportunity to make some chat. So my guests today were Joanna Dyduch, Jarosław Nowak, and Sebastian Rejak. Thank you very much for attending. And I think thank you very much. And